Hello and welcome to the first video looking at the poetry anthology poems. I'm starting off with the first 8 that we're doing this year in year 10. I might also throw up some videos for the ones that we do in year 11 as well. Now these are here to support you because I know that there's the PowerPoints that are on Show My Homework. I know that I've sent the PDF file with some annotations on it, and obviously there's the digital version of the poems as well. But just, this will be a useful way of perhaps supporting you if you're not so sure about some of the poems, just going through some old PowerPoints that I've used with classes in the past. So these PowerPoints aren't the same as the ones you'll see on Show My Homework, and they can be used kind of supplementary to them. They will have tasks on them that you don't necessarily have to do, but they might be ones that you do and just kind of use to, again, supplement what you're doing already. So this is Ozymandias that we're looking at first, because it's the first one that I would teach if we were doing it in class. It just says here, sort of just to get you thinking, why do we build statues? What do they often represent? And how does it change your view if you know that the person represented by the statue ordered its creation? Now, if I ask you a question sort of during these videos, what I generally do is give you 5 seconds or so of silence, so you can pause the video and maybe have a think about it if you want to, but obviously do spend a bit more time on it if you want to. So have a think and then sort of restart the video in a few minutes. So, the first thing's always useful to do is to read the poem and then just think about what your first thoughts are. I can tell you what the poem's about, I can tell you some of the ideas about the poems, but the best answers are always the ones which come kind of from your own personal opinions or views about the poem. We'll start by reading it out. Once I've read it out, have a bit of a think about what you think about it, what you think it might be about, and then I'll take you through some annotations. So, I met a traveller from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in a desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. On the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, king of kings, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Nothing beside remains. Round a decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretched far away. So yeah, there's the poem. It's Ozymandias. Just have a bit of a think, if you haven't already, about what you think it might be about, and then I'll take you through the poem sort of bit by bit. So this was a PowerPoint I used with a class, and it was just designed in a way that was trying to support as best I could the understanding. Because at the end of the day, when you analyse a poem, the understanding of the poem is more important than anything, because from that is the foundation of all your analysis. If you want to do it based off the colours I've put up there, I'll be honest with you, the colours and the words like structure, meaning, imagery, language, emotion, effect, they're a bit more fluid, perhaps, than they are on this PowerPoint. So whether you want to stick so rigidly to that, it's up to you. However, the annotations themselves might be useful, and they should support, as I said, the rest of the stuff that you've been doing, kind of give you a better understanding, hopefully, what's going on. So when looking at Ozymandias, the main thing to be aware of first and foremost is that you do need to know a bit about context when it comes to the poems. So it's a bit like the context you learned about when it came to William Golding for Lord of the Flies and when it came to Stevenson for Jekyll and Hyde. You don't always need to know about the poet necessarily, but the reasons the poem was created perhaps, or kind of the wider meanings that were being aimed at. With this one, though, Percy Shelley was a romantic poet. So, a romantic poet, basically, you might assume that's someone who writes about romance or writes about love and affairs of the heart, and sometimes it was. But actually, their big kind of thing about the romantic poets was that they were very anti-establishment. So, therefore, anyone that represented powerful kind of authorities in society. So, you can assume religion, government, monarchy, and they were actually also very, very much kind of, I say, supporters of nature, but they were very much loved the natural world. So a lot of their poetry would be about the natural world and perhaps be rallying against some of those man-made creations of kind of religion and monarchy. So I'll take you through the poem and just sort of talk about some of the things you might want to annotate, things you might want to pick up. So Ozymandias, first and foremost, is worth bearing in mind that he is based on, or is the ancient Greek name for Ramses II of Egypt. So he is based on a real person, and this it kind of comes from some sense of reality, this poem, rather than some of the ones that you'll see. Now, when you look at poetry, one of the things you have to think about is not just the poet themselves, but the persona of the person who's telling the poem. So the poem is not always being told by the poet. They might have kind of put themselves in a position of someone who is then telling the poem. So when he says, I met a traveller, chances are Percy Shelley didn't meet a traveller to talk about this, but the persona is I, he is the person who's talking, but actually the story is being told through the eyes of a traveller. They are the person who's telling us this story, even though it kind of comes through the first person of Percy Shelley. Now, the idea of the traveller, the idea of the antique land, antique being an adjective there, is it sets this idea of this kind of ancient world. It's kind of like this is a historical, mythological, almost kind of environment that's being described about, almost like stories of old. The fact that almost like there's a historical element to the idea that this is how humans behave at times. Because what the story is about a man who commissioned a statue. He was a ruler. He told people to basically make a statue to show you how wonderful he was, and it's about the after effects of that and kind of what happens now. So, sort of selling the idea of kind of like this is what humans are like is an interesting thing to kind of set up initially. What's left of the statue is two vast and trunkless legs of stone and the shattered visage that lies there. So basically the idea is that you've got two legs and the face. So even though this wonderful statue was built in honour of Ramses II or Ozymandias, nothing really remains. And it says vast and trunkless, the idea being that basically there's only legs, and vast being sort of, huge. And then you have the idea of in the sand, the shattered visage lies and it's half sunk. So even the face is half buried in the sand. So even what you can only really see very, very little of what's left. Now, it talks about the frown and wrinkled lip and the sneer of cold command. Cold command being a good use of alliteration there, sort of quite an aggressive way of describing this person. These are the kind of the features that are seen on the face of Ozymandias. And it says here that it tells that his sculptor well those passions read. The idea that actually the sculptor saw the sort of person that Ozymandias was. He was not a nice person, and therefore, there's a frown, there's a wrinkled lip, and he has a sneer on him as if he is above people and kind of like that arrogant way. It says here, which yet survives, stamped on these lifeless things. Stamped, again, quite an aggressive verb there to be used to describe the kind of like the creation of the statue itself, and possibly links to the idea of the way that he treated people. He didn't treat people very well, and we see that in the next line: the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. He is the hand that mocked them. He mocked them. And treated them unfairly in some ways, and perhaps wasn't the best king, which you could argue probably comes through best in the fact that he hasn't got the statue built for him. The statue actually was commissioned by him to show how wonderful he was, which is kind of undermines the point of what a statue is about. And what you have, and the pedestal still remains, and this is where you get some sort of the irony of the whole poem is, my name is Ozymandias, king of kings, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. What he's saying here is basically that his kingdom is amazing and needs to be looked upon, and other people should almost feel as if they are not as good or not as capable or not as powerful as he is or not as wonderful. And it's showing off his ego, showing they should feel bad for what they haven't got because he is the king of kings. Yet the next line kind of undermines that completely by saying nothing beside remains. Basically, if we take the statue to be representative or metaphorical of his power, the statue has fallen apart. He has died. He no longer has the power that he talks about. Power itself is fleeting. And that's brilliantly kind of shown to us by the use of the colon in the middle. Now, it's called a caesura, not the colon itself, but that break in the middle of a line. So it could be a full stop. It could be any other sort of punctuation that breaks up the line. But it forces the reader to pause. So actually, this whole bombastic, look at my works, ye mighty in despair, is completely undermined by nothing beside remains. And it talks about the fact that round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretched far away. Now, I've highlighted colossal wreck, colossal again being a good adjective to use, and the idea of the wreck, sort of a good noun to use to describe something. That could be multiple things. It could be the statue. Obviously, it's literally fallen apart. His kingdom, perhaps, it's now no longer exists. It is a wreck, effectively. And his power no longer exists as he knew it. He doesn't really, he has no real importance to us at all now. He is, he may have thought he was this important and powerful person, but he, fails miserably in terms of, his legacy and longevity. The interesting thing here is the last line, though. The lone and level sand stretched far away. And we talked about romantic poets being people who were very, very, enjoyed the natural world. What is being suggested here is actually nature itself is more powerful than humans. The idea of the sands stretching far away, sands stretch far away is sibilance, the repetition of the S sounds, and it almost mimics the sound of the sand itself that he's describing. And it can kind of be linked perhaps to the idea of the passing of time through an egg timer, perhaps, and also just the sand that would have eroded away the statue, alongside the wind. That is the thing. And the idea of far away, the last two words that are used in this poem, indicate that this expanse of nature is huge, and it spreads out for miles, and could again be linked to the idea of time, the fact that nature is permanent and always here, in a way that the power that Ozymandias believes he had, and remember Ozymandias could be representative of other powerful humans, it doesn't last as long as they want it to, that power itself is fleeting. In the bottom box, I've just tried to summarize kind of the overarching kind of meaning of the poem. The poem is about how power doesn't last and nature always takes over in the end, no matter what arrogant thoughts a king or ruler has. Hopefully that's a good starting point with regards to the meaning of the poem. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is just when you're looking at the poems, you need to be thinking about language, form and structure if you can. Now, we've talked about language. Structure basically is, as you'll see, the idea of the rhyme scheme could be something you look at. For this one, the idea also that there's one stanza. One stanza might link to the idea of one statue, one person being talked about, one power, one wherever it's going to be. Generally, the one stanza links to the idea of oneness that's in this poem. But maybe more importantly is the form. The form itself is a sonnet. Now, a sonnet is usually a love poem, and it's a poem written that you write for someone else to say how much you love them. So it might be interesting to think about why Shelley has used a love poem to explore this idea of the power of Ozymandias and the power of what he thought he had. But also, as you'll see here, the Italian sonnet usually, and it gives you the rhyme scheme there, and it shows you what the English sonnets are as well. Shelley's poem is a sonnet, but it doesn't necessarily follow these regular patterns and is a bit more broken up. Have a bit of a think, without me wanting to spell it out for you, have a bit of a think. Why would Shelley utilise a sort of a love poem structure, but then utilise it in a way that breaks up and is not as regular as the usual sonnets are? Should be hopefully fairly sort of self-explanatory about if you think about what the theme of the poem is, but obviously it's something that you might want to sort of draw some conclusions on. Analysing language is important, but when you can go to structure and form, that is kind of your next level and really, really challenging stuff. So do have a bit of a think about that as well. Hopefully that's been useful. I will plan, as I said, to put up the other ones over the course of the next week or so. Obviously, as always, any questions, concerns, do email me. Stay safe and be well.